Welcome, everyone, to How to Lead with Justice with Rita Sever and Mia Henry. That's me. So excited to talk about Rita's book today and some insights that she has about what supervision and management look like in our organizations that are working for justice and equity. Again, my name is Mia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the founder and CEO of Freedom Lifted, a consulting firm focusing on education and training for nonprofits and public libraries who are working for justice. And of course, our main star here is Rita Sever, she, her pronouns, the author of Leading for Justice, an HR trainer and consultant. Rita, you want to get off mute really quick and say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody. Thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. And we also are joined by my colleague, Aaron Butler, who handles data and evaluations at Freedom Lifted and is also doing tech and chat support for us today. You want to say hi to everyone, Aaron?
Yeah, it's great to be here with everybody. If you have any tech questions for me, feel free to send me a chat and I'll try to help you out.
Yay. So today we're going to spend about Rita and I will spend about 25 minutes in conversation together. And then we're going to take questions from you all, either in the chat and then Aaron will ask the questions, as many questions as we can get from the chat of Rita. And if we have time, we can get off mute. And then we'll end with a few next steps because both Freedom Lifted and Rita's consulting firm have some great opportunities coming up, and we want to make sure you know about those. It'll be a quick hour, and this is where we're going. Many of you know me. My name, again, Mia, and I'm an educator, facilitator. I do work in higher education. I've worked in higher education. I've been a nonprofit founder, an ED, and I've been doing a lot of training and partnering with public libraries since 2016. Oh, no. Oh, yes. and And then Freedom Lifted, we talk about shared power and supervision. We have our training work rooted in this idea of shared power. And for what that means for us, and that's really how this conversation is framed and how we were drawn to Rita's work, is that every staff member in our organization, we are working constantly, right, to ensure that every staff member, regardless of gender, disability, race, and other identity factors, right? Social identity factors, all have access to the needed resources to do their job successfully. They are seen and recognized as inherently valuable. They know simply because they're working at your organization that they are trusted and believed, that they can do the job, and they are recognized for the contributions that they make, right? That every staff member has voice in some decision making that impacts their work, and they're able to make choices about how they approach their work. They may not be able to make choices about strategic direction or tactical focus, but in the day-to-day and operational work, the things that they are responsible for, they have agency in how they do some of that work. And of course, we want to make sure that everybody is physically and psychologically safe. So this is how we root our training work, all of our training work, and especially that with managers and those of us with positional power in our organizations and our communities. So given that, I'm so excited to introduce Rita Sever, a management leader, an HR consultant with Roadmap Consulting, and with her own firm. And she's also a writer and author of 2 books, the latest of which is what we use as a primary text for our supervision training, Leading for Justice. So we're going to talk a little bit about some key points from the book, and also some barriers that folks may have in taking action, because many of us may be trained up and know what we're doing, know what we're supposed to be doing, but struggle actually getting it done from day to day. So what does that look like? And particularly in this moment of, I would say, severe repression of our movements and just unapologetic hostility towards our goals. What does it look like to support people through the overwhelm that so many of us are feeling in trying to focus and serve our communities and our people, given the current climate? And how do we always stay in partnership in accountability processes once they are in place? So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to Stop with the slides now. So we just see the faces. Rita, welcome, welcome. I'd love
Hi.
you to just share with folks. Yeah, give Rita some love, especially if you've read her book or read any of these quick quotes we've been sharing of yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, just tell us a little bit about, you see the love coming in.
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah, about
So,
your background in HR,
okay.
how you've come to this work and even writing a book, because there's a lot of people out there doing consulting work and and
Yeah,
had this rich experience, but I have not been able to put it all together in such a wonderful way that you have. So tell us a little bit about your.
thank you so much. So my journey in HR and management started when I worked at a small grassroots AIDS service organization at the height of the AIDS epidemic. We had 8 employees. And our executive director came in one day in the way of nonprofits and said, I just got a grant. We're going to double our staff. Someone needs to hold these files. Who wants to hold the personnel files? And I thought that sounded interesting. So I said, I'll do that. And I was doing admin work, so it made sense. So that's how I started, and I had to figure out what that meant. So I found a mentor and I took a lot of classes. Eventually, I got my master's in organizational psychology. But that was really the start of it. And it informed my whole career because working in an organization that was focused on service people who were living and dying with AIDS at that time, my focus was all about how do I help people do this difficult work? And that's what I saw as my role in HR. So that was the start. I was there for 9 years. By the time I left, we had 50 employees, and we had built a culture together that really was focused on doing the difficult work, being a strong team. And we did a lot of laughing and crying together, and it was a very powerful experience. Then I moved to an organization that had 250 employees, and it was a very different experience. Um, it some people were there just for the job, not necessarily for the mission, and so that was a shift for me. And how to make keep everyone engaged when that was the case. And there were like 5 huge divisions, so it was a very different job. And then I spent 9 years there. The other thing that happened there was a community action agency, community action network. And that's really where I learned that I was white and what that meant in terms of my work and my power and my position. And we were doing, at that time, we called it diversity work. And a big focus was on doing our own work. And so that was a huge part of my journey. And eventually, after another 9 years, I became a consultant and I worked totally with nonprofits and a lot of social justice organizations. And that's where I started to really notice and connect the dots that while people were so focused on their mission and they were there for the work to fight oppression in the world, but internally they felt challenged. They felt like there were sexism, racism, ableism, focus on neurotypical processes, and people didn't always feel included. And sometimes they felt like the organization didn't appreciate them, didn't acknowledge them, didn't value them. And so I really heard and thought a lot about how is this okay that our staff feels like they're not being treated justly while their whole focus is on attaining justice in the world. And so that's what led me to write the book.
Wow. And so that, as much as I've talked to you and read about your background, I don't think I realized about those maybe four phases, really,
Hmm.
right? Like beginning with a very small staff and not even seeing yourself as an HR person at all. But there
Right,
was a need, there was a need to take care of the people because
right,
what an organization that goes from 8 to 50, what is that? That's doubling two times, right? That's two or
right,
three times. And so that type of work, and I know there's a lot of people, myself included, who've worked for these types of scrappy organizations that had to or shift because of resource changes, and then moving to an organization that um, was so much bigger, and then being in an organization where your consciousness was raised around identity, and then
right,
being a consultant,
right,
right? Which I know is just that um, you're able to work with so many different people in all of those phases. So to write, but still, a lot of people don't write books, Rita. So, so how did you? I'm always so impressed of the comprehensive nature of your book. That you are covering a lot of the nuts and bolts of supervision. But certainly, the culture is a big part. I mean, that's part of the subtitle, right?
right,
It's not just about rules, creating rules and processes, but it really is around what kind of culture are we nurturing in our organizations. That we always talk about how do we prefigure the worlds we want to build within our organizations, right? How do we nurture those cultures amongst us
right.
as we're advocating for that to be what is happening in the wider world where everyone is seen, heard, and
Absolutely.
valued. So how did you what are some of the key points you feel like from the book as since it's been out? I think it's been out for 4 years now,
Right.
right? Since it's come out and been in the world, and you've been in conversation with people and used it as you continue to consulting work, what are some of the points of the book that have really resonated um, with folks, and what you've
Right.
learned since writing it?
I think the subtitle is really what I would lean on again, that, the HR people are happy to have a hint of how to do HR differently than just the mainstream dominant culture authoritative model,
Mm-hmm.
and how HR can be used to operationalize justice in an organization. And then supervision, my business is called Supervision Matters, so I'm all about supervision and the nitty-gritty of that. People seem to really appreciate having concrete tools that they can read 2 or 3 pages and say, okay, I got something I can do differently. Um,
Mm.
and then the culture part, it just infuses everything. And so I've had several conversations with people about, how the culture feels so amorphous, but there are ways to start tipping the scale a little bit the way we want our culture to be, and how incredibly important that is. That culture is the impact of the organization between supervision, which is the day-to-day experience of working in an organization, and then the feeling of being there. That's what people experience in an organization. That is their takeaway of what it means to work there.
Great, thank you so much. Um, and so with the culture pieces, I really love in the book how there is this um, piece around self-reflection and self, just we
Yeah.
always talk about this revolution begins with the self and how what we're doing. And I was with a group yesterday, and we talked so much about what it means for people who have positional power to model what they hope and expect the people in their on their staff to be able to do, right? And so when we talk about psychological safety, if you want people to feel comfortable asking questions, taking risks, making
Mhm.
requests, right, then the people with positional power need to be comfortable doing that and do it, even if they're not comfortable.
Right, exactly.
Right? Do those things. So yeah, I would love for you to just talk a little bit more about there's a lot of folks know what they are supposed to be doing, right? And and they read the book and like me, maybe underlining things. They go to all the trainings, but what might be keeping them from taking some of those steps, both for self-reflection and changing the way that their organizations doing the things that tip the scales? What gets in the way for folks?
Okay, so I think both of those are different answers, although they may be related. The self-reflection, I think it's purely people being so busy that taking even 10 minutes to be self-reflective feels really self-indulgent. And yet it can be such a game changer. My practice was I would try to schedule, and I would literally schedule it 10 minutes every Friday to just sit back and think about how did this week go, anything I need to fix, anything I need to follow up on, anything I need to repair, and anything I want to focus on or do different next week. And so that would save time in the long run, but it's hard to capture that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's, I think, the overwhelm and the busyness and the task list are what get in the way of the self-reflection. In terms of management and practices and specifically accountability, I think what often stops people is we're all so nice. We're nice people. And it feels like we're not being nice when we
hmm
have a hard conversation or when we try to hold somebody accountable. And that's not true. And we may even know that in our head that I need to do this, but we really have to shift our mindset from being nice to being kind. Kind is telling the truth and having your clear focus on your mission and the success of your staff. And if you care about those three things, then you're going to make yourself have those hard conversations
yeah,
because otherwise people will not be able to be successful.
yeah,
So I think that's a main factor. I think other factors are the power dynamics. We get very nervous when there are um, visible or known differences between supervisor and staff. I know as a white person, it's hard to have an accountability conversation with a person of color or somebody, a man, somebody who's older or younger than I am. It just gets
mm,
messy, and we become overly conscious of that sometimes. It's good to be aware of those and account for those dynamics, but it can also stop us, and that doesn't help.
yeah.
So those are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah. And I said when we were preparing for this, I told you I was going to talk a little bit about just how we talk about accountability as inspired from your book. And because we're in this accountability conversation, I do want people to know that we do think about accountability as both setting a strong foundation, as my wonderful colleague Jolynn talks about. That means making sure your expectations are clear, making sure that we can use success as a motivation, right? So people know when they've done a good job. And then also being able to clearly connect how people's work, how your staff's work connects to the larger mission, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So yesterday I was in a great organization that supports survivors of sexual and domestic violence, of sexual and domestic violence, right? Survivors. And so they were always coming back to this question of how does everyone's work support survivors, right? How does
Absolutely.
everyone's work support survivors? So we really want to be able to be clear about the work we're doing. You talk about that as well. If the organization is not clear in its mission, it doesn't really matter how great a supervisor is. And
Right.
so when we're clear in our mission, how do we remind people of how their work is contributing to that mission all the time? That's part of accountability too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. one of the points I wanted to make thinking about accountability is that, again, I think it's a mind shift because in our culture as a whole, we often think of accountability as a discrete action. Like we have
Yeah, yeah.
supervision, and then when people mess up, then we have to hold them
Right.
accountable. And
Hmm.
I think we need to shift that and understand that accountability is part of everything we do as a supervisor. Every time we have our one-on-one meeting, we're not focusing on accountability, but as you just said, we're building the foundation so that we can take the follow through when we get to that point where we realize things aren't working. So accountability really just means following through,
Yeah, yeah,
that you're making sure people do what they said they would do, what they want to be doing, what you need them to do, what the mission needs them to do. And so all of those are sown throughout the process. I have a graph I use in one of my trainings called the arc of accountability. And it starts much like the 3 points you just made of first you have to determine success and talk about that, make sure you're on the same
yeah,
page, have clear expectations, then build strong agreements, give clear feedback, both positive and negative when necessary, normalizing giving feedback,
yeah.
and then following through. So that's really all about accountability. And I will just mention one of the key tools for me is the question. That's one of the sections in my book. And it is very clarifying to keep the question in mind. And the question is, how does this action impact the work?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it can be distracting and we can think about, be distracted that people aren't being as nice as they were last week, or these two people aren't talking to each other, or
Mhm.
even somebody's facing a hard time in the personal life. But to come back as a supervisor to the clarity of how is this impacting the work? And if it isn't, then it might not be any of your business.
Yes. Yes, every time I bring that point up for folks, they're it's almost like a sigh of relief of like, oh, I don't have to address every single thing that is
Yes,
happening.
right.
I just need to address what's affecting the work and be able to articulate how it's affecting the work too. I like how in the book you say that, how is it affecting morale? How is it affecting productivity? Is it affecting time management? Is it affecting
Mhm.
teamwork? Like actually
Absolutely.
being able to name how is it affecting the work, first of all? If it is, how is it affecting the work? Because that is going to be the rationale for all of the action that you
Absolutely.
take afterwards, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I love that. We just
Great.
love that part. If it's not affecting the work, just keep moving.
Yeah. And again, as nice people, sometimes that's hard for
Yeah,
us. We
yeah.
want to make everybody feel good, and sometimes we just can't.
Yeah, sometimes people are partly cloudy. If it's
Right.
not affecting the work, they may even be in tornadoes. It's not affecting the work, right? Because they've had their own ways of managing
Right.
what's happening. So
And
trust
it
me.
doesn't mean you can't be real with them and say, I hope your day gets better.
Right.
You're still in conversation, you're still in relationship, but in terms of accountability, that is the key question.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for that emphasis. All right. So we want to talk about, we've already hinted at it, right? People might be overwhelmed and it is affecting the work, right?
Yes.
So what would be some of the ways that, particularly in this moment where folks are, I'll just say what I've witnessed, um, are very fearful, right? There's clearly scarcity happening because there's resources being taken away from so many of our nonprofits and our public libraries, and they have having out of necessity for survival contract right their programs, services, and staff. And a lot of people may be coming in and wondering, am I next? Or
Mhm.
they've lost friends and colleagues because of downsizing, or they can see it's taking a toll on the people they serve, and they're having to hold so much more um, weight
Mhm.
because people in their
Yeah.
communities are so afraid. So, in this way, it's not it's affecting the work, right? Because it's affecting morale, and so many of the other things that we listed can also be affected. What do you recommend for people, and how they support their staff who might be really struggling with overwhelm?
Yeah, it's it's overwhelming to think about this because I know every nonprofit I know was already so overwhelmed with the work in their to-do list. And now, as you said, with the added scarcity and the emotional component of all that's going on, it's a lot. So I think that's the first step is just to acknowledge that. I think it's important to make some room at work to have feelings. We are full emotional people. So it doesn't mean we have to spend hours talking about how horrible are, but making sure that, again, there's the connection. The question you started with, the poll you started with, doing that kind of thing with your staff of how are you doing today? And just making, again, a little room to be able to sigh and say, it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah,
So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's critical as a supervisor to help your staff clearly understand their priorities. And if everything's a priority, then nothing is a priority. So it is critical
yeah,
to hopefully you can name your top 3 or 5 priorities. You can even check, let's both write down what we consider the priorities of your job to be and see if we're aligned. And if not, we'll talk about that. That helps because part of the overwhelm, excuse me, is just feeling like it's not possible to do this job anymore.
yeah,
And the studies show us that burnout happens not just when people have a lot of work, but when they have a lot of work and they feel like it doesn't make a difference or it's not seen or appreciated. So making sure you acknowledge the work your staff are doing, make sure you thank them, make sure you give them some space again to be human, you know, encourage them to take their vacation, even though the world's on fire. We still have to do self-care to be able to keep doing the work. And so I think those are the key points. The third one that maybe is the most important is to listen. Listen to your staff. Every conversation needs to be 2 ways. And if they are repeatedly telling you, I'm overwhelmed,
yeah,
you have to figure out how to help them with that.
yeah. And be okay with, if we have the power, to eliminate some things,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
really focus on what's most critical work right now,
Right.
um, to
And it's
keep
just,
capacity.
we have to, as a sector, acknowledge that we cannot do everything all at once.
Yeah.
And often our task lists are just too long and too overwhelming. So, yes, being able to be clear about the priorities, week by week, if necessary.
Yeah.
Maybe you have 2 lists, the overall priorities of the job and the priorities between now and when we meet again. And that can help people feel steadier in their work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a friend of mine working in public libraries right now repeated something that she heard that I thought was, so it really resonated. Um, it was around how we're still sometimes using systems or trying to move through processes in a world that no longer exists,
Right.
right? And
Absolutely.
so I think that's another thing that some people are feeling is an irrelevance
Right.
of their work. And so we really have to be honest about what is needed now in this
Right.
moment and not have people just doing the jobs they've been doing because that's the way it's always been.
Right.
Things will
Exactly.
change. Things have changed. You
Absolutely.
know?
Good
So
bottom line summary.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's all for my questions. I want to make sure that everyone else has an opportunity for questions as well. And I know that you've already, with the spirit of partnership, talked through many of the things that many of our things that we've already talked about. You've brought in that spirit of partnership, but I want to invite my friend and colleague Jolynn Reisdorf in for a second to ask a question of you and be part of this conversation because Jolynn and I have been such great partners in developing our training based on your book. So,
Thank
Jolynn?
you.
Thank you. Um, I think it's a little, I'm lucky because my organization still really supports being rooted in justice. And like as a manager, that's where I get to be. And while we are holding that space for our community who, their resources are going away, what do we do as leaders for the community who are challenging us for, having social justice programs or for, I mean, maybe even just having your book on the shelf? Like, do you have any suggestions for management who's, facing that as well?
I have a couple responses. The first one is I flashed on what my executive director would say again back when we were doing diversity work. And she would tell our staff and our board and the community, we are doing this work because it is essential to our mission. If we are going, the mission was to serve low-income people. And she was so articulate about saying, we can't do that if we don't understand how we show up and how these power dynamics are at play in our communities and our culture. So that's the first thing. It's about the mission. Um, and it makes it a little harder to then attack it just as doing DEI work. Um, and the other thing I would say is to bring yourself back to like worst case scenario, your own organization says we're not going to do this. Bring it back to the people you work with. You can still apply these values and these practices and be a welcoming person who is safe for anyone who works with you. And that will make a tremendous difference.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I feel comfortable being like, oh, my work touches the mission, and I just see sometimes my staff are struggling. Like we had a drag queen bingo program that was very successful that ended up having some commentary on social media after, and my staff are having a hard time, like, oh, maybe we should not do that program. And I'm
Right.
like, absolutely not. Like this goes with our mission and our admin is supporting us, but now they are having that pull where they're not sure where they should be.
Right. That's very hard and frustrating and maddening and all those things. I think the other thing is to just acknowledge that too, to say it's really hard that we're getting these comments when we're doing something that is so clearly helpful and part of our mission. Thank you.
Okay, Rita, I have some questions in the chat here that I'm gonna um, read. And then for people who I do read your questions in the chat, as Rita and me are responding to them, I will, if you would like to come on video, I will spotlight you and then I'll unmute you so that you can respond. I think we're going to start with Sarah and Maureen. And so Sarah asks, are there specific tools or strategies that you would recommend for supervisors who are operating in a union environment, particularly during active organizing efforts and/or tumultuous times? And Maureen says, somewhat adjacent to Sarah's question, my public sector organization, a library, is on a journey to move away from our past approach where managers support staff 100% and don't hold necessary accountability to where we are going. Accountability, stronger supervision, etc. This is hard and also necessary and takes stamina at all levels. Thoughts on considerations to keep in mind as we keep going. Thank you.
Okay. So I think I will speak from my experience again. When I was working at CAP, when I joined that staff, there was a union drive in process. And shortly after I started, the union was voted in. And it was challenging. It shifts things a little bit. You can't have quite the freedom you did before. But I always thought of it, I tried to think of it as the union is my partner, and they are going to make sure I do the job in the way that I should be doing it. And that I may have to take a few extra steps in terms of making sure the union knew what I was doing. But we had the same goal in mind. We wanted to make sure staff felt safe and protected and supported. Um, so that helped me a lot. It doesn't answer Maureen's question. I think it was your question about when your leadership is trying to push you back to another more dominant practice of how to do supervision. But I think, again, you can bring these values into your work, and even like they may call something a letter of warning, and you can acknowledge that, yes, this is a letter of warning, and that means that it is your chance to turn it around. This is a chance for you to show that you can do the job that I know you can do. So just trying to not deny the language they're using or the process they're using, but translate it, if you will, to a more user-friendly and partner-based approach to supervision. I don't know if that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, I'm happy to hear it, either of you.
Thank you. This is Maureen. I don't think I phrased my question super well. What I was trying to articulate was I'm the director of the library, so I'm moving us away from a culture where supervisors were just like not holding the accountability.
Okay.
Yeah, so working on
Okay.
strengthening their ability to do that. And for some of my employees that have been here for a long time, even a coaching conversation or a feedback conversation feels like getting in trouble
Right.
based on
Yeah.
our past, some of our past
Okay.
approach, which was just like never talking about it. So
Right.
yeah, it was really like just we are also a union environment, so that's why I built on Sarah's question, like all of those dynamics, especially what's happening in the world, like really leads to what often looks like distrust, right? Because as I keep
Right.
working with my managers to have the necessary conversations.
So I appreciate that you clarifying the question, because I took it the other way. Absolutely, that is an important shift. And I think the more you can frame it in, this is again about our mission, and we need to make sure people are doing the work that they need to be doing to make our mission function. I would sometimes tell managers that, this needs to change, because not only is it not fair to the staff member that they don't know how to be successful, but if our funders found out that we were paying people to not do their job, that's not okay. We need to be responsible stewards of our budget as well as caring for our people along the way.
This is Sarah. I got unmuted too, and I just wanted to say thank you for your reflections on this topic. And I think it's interesting because I came into my question from more of the standpoint of middle management, which is the role I've pretty much found myself in every place in libraries and nonprofits. And just thinking about Maureen's follow up. um, I think there's this place where some of the modeling of accountability, like self accountability, often opens the doorways to managers being like, oh, this is something we're all doing. If Marina's director is like showing what accountability looks like for her, hopefully that's like a modeling place. And I think that for me in middle management with like a union environment, often I feel like my allegiances are really like split and divided, and I have less information, less influence, but a huge, unwavering sense of responsibility that, is just magnified by my like white identity, white womanness. So all of that just to say, like, I think some of those strategies and tools, like how would you recommend people who are kind of in that middle management where you supervise people, but you don't actually have like much of a voice in like determining negotiations or those kinds of pieces? Are there any suggestions you would have for that role?
I do have a section in the book that is specifically about middle management. And I think one of the key practices as a middle manager is to keep the communication going both ways, up so that upper management hears the concerns of your staff as well as yours, and that you then bring communication to your staff so they understand. I think that's one of the most powerful ways you can be effective as a middle manager. And the other thing that I have seen be very effective, and it may not be possible, but building a middle manager circle so that you share, excuse me, ideas and frustrations and tips with each other.
And I'd love to say along those lines, because I hear a lot from folks who are in union environments and are trying to figure out what um, the power dynamic, how the power dynamic impacts their relationships and their ability to hold accountability processes.
Right.
And a person who actually runs an organization and helps other places unionize, that organization unionize.
Uh-huh.
And so they knew so much about what a union can do and just what it's not really built to do, right? And sometimes there's a
Right.
lot of hope and expectations around what unionizing is going to do for workers that have felt left out of processes in the past. And we have to level set what the purpose of a union is, which is to improve material conditions. It is not necessarily going to give people a voice in strategic direction or have input in communications, right? External communications. So I think it's important for people who are unionized or in a union to be clear about what the union's power is and what is not, and that there's a lot of work that still has to be done around culture that a union cannot solve. The other thing is those clear expectations become really important in a union environment. We talked about that generally, but I was looking back. I kept looking over here because I was looking at my notes, and this is what between you and Jolene and what I've learned so much. I'm going to put it in the chat. What the clear expectations are for what decisions are made. I believe that you have this actually in your book, Rita. What decisions they can make versus what requires approval. Like the management and union need to agree on these things, right? What outcomes does the staff own versus what outcomes their manager owns? What are non-negotiable standards and processes? What are the escalation triggers that's around particular project, right? Of like, this no longer can be a discrete project, but it needs to bring in multiple stakeholders to make a decision. And of course, what success looks like. What is what does it look like when everything is going well? We don't have enough conversations about that.
Right.
Um, so, I think when we have made a habit of making our expectations clear at every stage, I find that there tends to be less tension, right? Um, Around um, union concerns because management union have agreed on these things up front, and you have a place that you can reference. So that's all I'll say about that.
That's great.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you. Mia, do we have time for one more question?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask Elizabeth's question here. If two employees have conflict, how do I help them improve communication? They seem to be having a power dynamic issue. One keeps pointing out the faults of the other publicly, and the other is very critical of the other quietly. One is a professional, one is a paraprofessional. I need this to improve because it's affecting our work.
Great. So you asked the question to start with. That's good. Um, I think it is important that I don't know in this scenario, Elizabeth, are you supervising both people or one of the people?
Both people.
Okay. So then you are in a position where you can bring them together and help mediate to some extent. And again, start with the grounding question of about the mission. I would often start mediations with, why do you work here? And that would help people both remind themselves of why the mission matters and to understand the other's journey to this place. And then the next part is how each of their jobs is critical to the department. And then do what I would do is a very structured active listening activity, which feels very artificial and is also very effective. And then I guess maybe before that, insert a section where you can say, as the supervisor, it is critical that you work together. What's been happening is not okay. That you don't have to like each other, but you have to work together. And that's what this looks like. And then moving into the mediation, then the question is, what do you need to be able to work with this person? And listening, and then the other person, and going from there. And a critical part of that, again, is being clear that this is not okay. This cannot continue. It is disruptive to your work and it's disruptive to the team.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm also in a union environment, so I'm also very conscious about that whole thing about, is this a formal grievance? I think you talk about in the book too, and like
Right,
probably getting clearance from either HR or my supervisors to even have the conversation. Otherwise, it blows back and I become the bad guy.
right.
So,
That's a good point. Yes.
yeah, I was
And
actually even
if there
thinking,
is a
mhm.
role for the union in that mediation also.
Ah, yeah, that's what I was thinking, like bring in an outside person to
Yeah,
either a union or a conflict resolution center or something to
right.
do it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Great to see you. And I think we have time for even one more question, if we can
All
get to
right.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
so great.
All right, let's do Claire's question here. When you are stepping into a new environment as a supervisor, how do you balance building relationships while beginning to address safety and justice accountability needs?
Um, will you read that last part one more time? I blipped for a minute.
No problem. How do you balance building relationships while
Oh, right.
beginning to address safety and justice accountability needs?
Okay, so I think the key ingredient there is the regular one-on-one meetings. That is one of my themes throughout both my books. That is where you can really build the relationship, have conversations that are about the work, but are also about each of you, not in terms of personal attributes, but so Mia, how do you do your best work? And let me tell you how I do my best work, and then we can talk about how we overlap or how we need to support each other. So conversations like that give information that informs the work, but also helps build our relationship. So taking time to connect to people in that work-related personal way, acknowledgement again goes a long way. And then, as you said in the question, prioritizing what needs to happen in terms of safety and justice. And that can be part of your conversation too, that this is on my priority list or this is on our priority list because it is essential both for our mission and for the safety and fairness and belonging of all our staff. So that's how I would answer in general without knowing the specifics, but that's my first round at that question.
And is Claire still here? Is that okay, Claire?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I found myself walking into environments as a new supervisor where you don't want to be the person who comes in and says, "Okay, we're going to change everything now." Obviously, you'd never want to do that to a staff. But I've also found that I've walked into environments where there were immediate safety needs that needed to be addressed. And so navigating that has been challenging. And so one-on-ones are absolutely. And so that's a great way to start. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. And the other thing would be to acknowledge that either in one-on-one meetings and in team meetings, if you have those, of saying, this is not the way I would usually start my work with a group because I want to hear from you what's working and not working. That's going to be part of our ongoing conversations. And there are some immediate needs that I just need to focus on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you all for the questions. We really appreciate it. We're coming to the end of our hour, so we want to make sure that you have some good next steps. Rita, thank you so much for joining me and joining my community here to talk through this. I mean, we're just touching tip of the iceberg, really.
I loved having this conversation with you, Mia, and we can continue indefinitely, I'm sure.
I know. We'll try to figure out more ways that we can continue to share your great work and be in community with people, trying to put a lot of these things in practice. And along, the lines of Claire's question and your answer to it, your book has so many great types of examples of check-in questions, and we have them also a bank of them in our own training, so we can test some of those out. So please be in touch with us. Erin is going to drop some links in the chat. This is Rita's upcoming training. We actually have 2 trainings coming up right in November, so this is perfect. November 12th, a 3-hour training. So you can email Rita at rita@supervisionmatters.com to get involved with that training. And then, of course, our fantastic book. We can drop a link in the chat to get that as well. And then Jolene and I, we have our training for nonprofits and public libraries coming up on Thursday, November 6th. And it's a 4-hour training. And it's a little more expensive than Rita's. I'm just, we didn't really check in about that, but yeah, it's a little bit longer, it's a little more expensive. We do have an online course, but I think anyone who took our course in the spring, I think you should definitely look into Rita's course and vice versa, because this is ongoing work. And there's no, it's not like getting an inoculation, right? Or vaccine. It's brushing your teeth. Supervision work is, so you got to work on it all the time, every day. So we hope you will join us for one of those. And yes, thank you everybody for this power hour with Freedom Lifted. Please get off mute and say goodbye before you leave. And if you want to stay on a little longer and ask questions, Rita and I will stay on for an extra 15 minutes.